and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Data Governance. How prepared are you? My name is Bruce Bull, and I'm pleased to be presenting with my colleague, Nicholas Ortiz. We are both from DaSy, and we welcome you to this presentation. I want to remind everybody that this is a recorded session. It will be available in the archives for anybody who missed it or wants to go back and listen to it and watch it again. Because of my bandwidth issues, I am going to turn my camera off right now because I've dropped twice in the preparation for this call, but you should be able to continue to hear my voice. And if I do drop off, I'll come back on again. Chris, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for us, please, which should be the, so I would like to go to the LA Times slide first. While Chris finds that slide, I'm going to invite anybody and everybody to use the chat for questions, as well as unmute themselves and go ahead and speak out if you want to anytime during the presentation. We'll specifically have a Q&A time towards the end. Now, you will note the date on this is October 2nd. That happens to be yesterday, where Los Angeles Unified School District was hacked, refused to pay ransomware, and 500 gigabytes of their data were released by those who hacked their system. So I can imagine there are some people within LA Unified School District over the last week and this week who have been dealing with the ransomware request and now the aftermath of this huge data breach. So data governance, it's a particularly timely topic, and our hearts go out to them because I can't imagine the angst that's happening. But it is a timely topic. Data breach is just one aspect of data governance. We wanted to let you know of this particular issue. In fact, this one happens to be the worst one I have ever heard about. And Nicholas and I were talking about that just briefly before this call. Okay, Chris, back to our slides. We've got the intended outcomes for this particular session. We wanted to share those with you. And they are there for your reading and understanding. Our hope is that by the end of this call, you'll have a better understanding of why formal data governance is critical to data collection, reporting, use, and security. We will, in fact, review some scenarios that demonstrate the importance of data governance. And at any time now and in the future, we hope that you'll understand that you can access DaSy resources and personnel to support your ongoing data governance work. And having seen these and knowing this is my slide, I'm going to add a few more that are not going to be on the evaluation that you're going to get. But really, data governance is about reducing your overall data risks. It's in part to reduce your liability if you're the data manager, right? It's to develop and apply some consistent policies and practices around your data work. And, you know, based on what we just saw, it's to keep your name out of the newspaper as well. So these are the three intended outcomes that we are going to focus on in this session. But there's some other side benefits also that come with that. And Nicholas, with that, I am going to punt this to you.
Thank you, Bruce. And again, welcome everybody. We appreciate you being here this morning or afternoon. Next slide, please, Chris. So we wanted to ground ourselves first in what data governance is, broadly speaking, and then we're going to drill down into some specific examples to help unpack the concept. And we also wanted to ground ourselves in why it's important. Bruce gave a perfect example at the top of the session here with that news article, but we'll unpack some other reasons about why it is important in your day-to-day operations. Next slide, please. So let's just define data governance as a beginning point here. Many organizations have their own definition. DaSy happens to have a specific definition for our context. We like to think of it as the overall management of the availability, usability, integrity, quality, and security of data. And you'll notice in the next sentence here, we're thinking of it both in terms of an organizational process and a structure. So it's kind of two things at the same time that you don't normally see with some of these sort of data concepts, but it's a process that is born out of a structure and vice versa. So it's really an iterative process to shore up your data systems, your data processes, data use. But as we'll talk about in a few moments, it's really important to consider a structure of teams, representatives, data stakeholders that come together to decide on these policies and procedures. And so it establishes responsibility for data, organizing program area or agency staff to collaboratively and continuously improve data quality. So we hope that your data quality should improve over time as you improve your governance processes and procedures. And you'll realize that typically through the systematic creation and enforcement of policies, roles, responsibilities, and procedures. And there are many types of data governance. We're going to unpack a few in a moment. Just a few quick examples right here off the bat. You could think about a data request fulfillment process. So how would you handle a request for data that comes from an external party coming to your agency or team who says, we would like some data for some certain purpose? How do you have some transparency and consistent expectations around how you would handle and fulfill that data request? Another example is user access controls. So how do you decide who gets access to what levels of data and who is an authorized, quote unquote, user of the data at various levels, from aggregate data all the way down to record level data? And finally, another example could be vetting of public reports. So what measures do you have for quality control of data as it gets processed and reported and or developed for public reports, internal reports? How do you decide who has the final say and responsibility for vetting what data gets released from your agency? So next slide, please. All right. Why is it important? Well, there are a number of reasons, more so definitely than are on this slide. We chose to just highlight a few most common reasons why it's important. And we would invite you to, in the chat for now, maybe share some additional examples of why you think it might be important. But of course, data breaches are common. We saw a perfect example with the LA Unified School District that just occurred. There are reports and studies showing that nearly half of US companies have faced a data breach, and nearly 2 out of 3 have been individuals in the country, Americans, have been personally impacted by a data breach. So that's a pretty significant chunk of the population and organizations. Chris, let's go back for just a few minutes. Thank you. State and federal laws have a lot to say about this, as many of you probably are familiar with. Some of the federal laws and state laws and regulations around data for children with disabilities, as well as more general education laws such as FERPA, have a lot to say about what measures should be in place by organizations to help protect the confidentiality and privacy of data, and what mechanisms are in place to enforce that, and what states should generally be expected to do to prevent disclosure of personally identifiable information. We know, public concern is high about this issue, but public trust is also quite low at the moment. There's a report from the Royal Statistical Society that talks about this concept of a data trust deficit. So there's generally a variety of surveys showing on the whole that the public are relatively skeptical and have low trust in organizations, private and public organizations, about data. And finally, public organizations are under increasing threat. So some of the latest data, for example, there was one report showing that 1 out of 6 cybersecurity breaches were from public entities. So that's a pretty significant chunk of a much larger set of instances on data breaches. So a lot of important reasons, again, probably more than we will cover here, but just some things to consider as we go along. Next slide, please. All right. So when we're talking about data governance in this presentation, we want to focus your thinking about this topic on formal data governance as opposed to informal data governance. Sort of like those dress shoes that you're seeing there versus the sneakers. I imagine a lot of us during COVID were probably erring on the side of our more relaxed set of shoes like that set on the right. But as far as data governance is concerned, hopefully you've got some formality to your policies and procedures, or you're considering ways to shore those up. And we provide here just a few examples on two specific topics related to data to give you a feel for what this looks like. So for example, for data sharing, if you think about data sharing and what informal data governance might look like, it could be a picture of unregulated child-level data sharing being allowed among internal and external agency staff and across external agencies. Whereas with formal data governance, you might have data sharing occurring among internal staff and external agencies. You've got some regulations in place and policies that are consistent with federal and state laws and requirements. You've got parent consent, formal agreements that need to be signed. You've got to keep those on file typically, and hopefully those address all the necessary components such as data storage, data use, and data destruction. Another example might be with data storage and access specifically. With informal data governance, perhaps data are not encrypted and they exist kind of out there on the agency's network for any staff member to access. That's not a pretty picture for when you think about access controls for sensitive data. Whereas with formal data governance, hopefully some type of encryption might be in place and those data are accessible only by staff with assigned permissions based on their positions. So, most of the data governance policies that come about, hopefully they're more specific on the specific end to increase that level of transparency. And it's really important also to think about, formal data governance, while it takes a lot of effort typically to draft and get those approved. Data governance is really going to be present whether it's written or not, because people make decisions, even in the absence of any kind of written guidance. So if you don't have formal data governance in place, it can breed inconsistency and problems with your data. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So we wanted to give you kind of a lay of the land across the nation about how states have been making strides in developing data governance since 2013. Some of you may be familiar with the DaSy State of the State survey. So we've had several iterations of this over the years, and we've asked a question about data governance all the way back since 2013. And that question states, does your state have a formal data governance body, emphasis on the formal, whose scope of responsibility includes data on children and families receiving Part C or 619 services? And this, you'll see in parentheses there, it does say that this governance body's scope of responsibility can be broader than Part C data or 619 data. So this question was asked of 619 coordinators and Part C coordinators. So if you were a Part C coordinator, you would see the Part C language, and 619 coordinators would see the 619 language. So in those charts there, you'll see in the blue section, those were states that had responded yes to this question in 2013 and in the most recent survey in 2021. And if you can click on the next click there, Chris, before we move to the next slide, but just a little animation here to emphasize on the, there we go. So on the, I want to draw your attention to the green slice, because those are the states who answered no in 2013, but yes in 2021. And so combined, those blue and green sections really represent those states who have a formal data governance body in place as of 2021. But the green section specifically shows those who made progress. And while Part C, the total proportion of Part C programs has slightly less in place, broadly speaking, across states, they did make some relatively larger gains, which was good news based on what the picture was in 2013. There is a little curious piece of data in that kind of peach slice there. Those technically represent those programs who responded who responded yes in 2013, but no in 2021. We don't know for certain why that might be. We suspect there might be some differences in understanding based on the respondents. Maybe perhaps there were different respondents in both years, and they possibly were interpreting that question differently. But we're interested to learn a little bit more about those programs as well. But in any case, broadly speaking, we're seeing good progress across state programs. And we hope, by virtue of your participation in today's webinar and possibly some future TA with DaSy or other TA providers, that we can help you kind of move along this continuum. Next slide, please. Okay. So let's take the next few moments here and imagine a few examples. We're going to provide a few scenarios and help you kind of think through what this would look like in some real world scenarios. So let's imagine a world without the formal data governance, and then we'll consider what it would look like with some formal data governance policies and procedures in place. Next slide. Okay. So consider this example. A data manager makes changes. Oh, let's go back one. Makes changes to the Part C data system. And these can be any kinds of changes really, but perhaps it's something like adding new response items to a question or data element, or new business rules, those kinds of things. And this might be the picture with informal data governance and some actions that might be taking place. So perhaps the Part C data manager makes changes with minimal lead time and without any input from program staff or stakeholders. Certainly not ideal. And because of the compressed time frame, staff do not document changes to the data dictionary, or they're not making updates to policies and procedures as things evolve. And on top of that, there may be little to no agency communication occurring with other associated agencies, data staff, or with the local agencies that actually provide the data. So not an ideal picture, to be sure. And as a result of those actions, on the next slide, we'll look at some potential outcomes that may be taking place. So as a result, we might see that local Part C agencies have inadequate lead time to modify, where it's applicable, the local data systems in order to align with those changes. That's a really important thing to keep up to date as those changes take place. And those changes may not align with other state agencies' data. And then perhaps since few, if any, business rules were developed during the system change, that could potentially lead to poor or inconsistent data. And finally, local providers and other end users are inadequately trained in a timely manner, resulting in a wide lack of understanding between state and local program staff. So not an ideal picture, but if we flip this and think about formal data governance, if we've got some of those policies and procedures in place on the next slide. So let's think about what actions would look like when you've got formal data governance in place. Perhaps the Part C data manager seeks stakeholder recommendations for change. So there's really a mechanism for seeking and prioritizing input from your data stakeholders and consumers. There might be formal recommendations submitted to an internal governance committee within the state agency, and you would adhere to established lead time policies for data changes. On top of that, your formal data governance committee would document and disseminate updated policies and procedures, including data business rules, to everyone who is affected and interested in this in your data in a timely manner. And finally, adequate training plans would be developed to address these changes. And as a result of those actions, on the next slide, some potential outcomes with formal data governance. This is hopefully what the picture would look like over time. Local Part C agencies would have adequate lead time to modify and align with the changes. clear policies are in place and they exist to align Part C data collections with other agencies' data. You've got business rules in place that lead to better data quality. You've got training and TA available on a timely basis, and all parties understand the reasons for changes, timelines, and ramifications. So some data governance nirvana here. This is what we want, to help you think about considering, getting to this place. And it doesn't happen overnight, but there are some key steps that you can develop in terms of developing your structure for how to make those decisions and how to document those resulting components. Okay, so we provided an example before and after data governance. So let's now imagine that, think through your own world at your level in your state program, what these scenarios that we're going to provide to you would look like with and without formal data governance. And we're going to invite a little bit of participation here in a moment. So get your thinking caps on if you would. And on the next slide. So in this scenario, let's say you've got a data request that comes in from the local media. Your local news is running a story on early intervention services in your state, and they want to know, XYZ about the Part C data, they want data about the program in order to tell their story. And this could be really any kind of data, whether it's financial data, perhaps some enrollment data, to help paint a picture for their news story. And then on the next click here, I'd like to invite you to either in the chat, or you're welcome to come off of mute, provide a few brief statements about what might this look like without formal data governance in place. So let's assume for a moment that you don't have some of those structures that we mentioned before, and this data request takes place. So I'll give you a moment to process that, and we invite you to share any of your thoughts in the chat or come off of mute.
This is Barbara Simpson in North Carolina. I have a pretty good idea actually about what this looks like without formal data governance, because it's kind of happened. And honestly, not too different than I think it would look like if we actually had this, every step of this written down, where basically it'd be one of those things, requests for data for my program almost always come directly to me, and it gets discussed with, when I have other data team staff, with the full data team and our branch head. And then the branch head would be probably more likely to be responsible for taking it if it needed to go up the chain, just like the next level of management within our division, whether anything was going to need to go past our public affairs office. There's all sorts of like structure in place organizationally that you just kind of know has to have input on something like that that's going to be in the media. And parts of that are written down, but I think really the part that happens within our little Part C section, where we just have like everybody get together and we decide what we're going to, what we're going to do about it and how we're going to respond, is the part that's probably, it's not written down anywhere.
I see. Thank you for sharing, Barbara. That's helpful to understand an example at the state level. It sounds like you've got at least some specific roles in place to help, shepherd things along, and perhaps some decision points that you've identified to say yes or no, whether it needs to go up the chain or if it's something that you can approve with your authority. But perhaps some room for improvement in documenting those.
Oh yeah, wait, and Bruce knows this. I can hear him laughing as I'm talking, that way too much of our data governance structure is basically living inside my skull. We have the added advantage that our former data manager is our sort of over our program now, so they have a real interest in data. It could be quite different if that wasn't the case. I very much want to get, once I've got a full team, I want formal data governance. I like rules and following them. It's just hasn't been something we've had the bandwidth or the space to really get a lot of it nailed down on paper. We've made a couple of attempts, but they've never gotten all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not uncommon to be wanting for the time to actually sit down and document. It's not the easiest when you've got competing priorities.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's one of those things that making the investment will pay dividends down the road eventually. Chris, if you would click on the next click here. Barbara, I think we've segued a little bit into this a little bit, but what might this scenario look like with formal data governance in place? Yeah, we've already heard about having like a clear chain of command, if you will, to understand when things need to go up and down, and how perhaps it might ultimately get published and sent back to the requester. Any other ideas about some steps that might be in place with formal data governance? I'll just add one that I'm sure we've all worked with before at some level, which is deciding what data you can actually provide and what has to be suppressed. So when do you deal with small n sizes, and if it's a public, external requester that is not authorized to be looking at sensitive data at a small level, you've got to determine at what point within a group size some of that data has to be suppressed. All right, let's look at. Oh,
I was going to say that's another part of that structure that we have in place. And I hope every other state has something like it that they can work with. We have a dedicated privacy and security office within our division, and a specific officer assigned to our program that's developed some expertise in both HIPAA and FERPA.
Mm-hmm.
We're no matter what department they put us in, we're kind of an oddball. Most Part Cs are, because of having HIPAA and FERPA implications. So that's part of that structure that we have too, is that privacy and security office to help with that kind of decision.
Yeah, wonderful. So you're fortunate to have a team, or at least one person that is sort of an advisor specifically on some of these FERPA and HIPAA issues. Great. All right, let's move to the next slide. We've got one more scenario to help you consider these issues. About an unauthorized PII disclosure. So I think perhaps we alluded to this from the previous example, but let's put another twist on this and say perhaps that a data savvy parent notifies you that in a public report of your 619 data, and it's disaggregated by local communities, that they were able to actually cross-reference data on their own to personally identify information on their own child and others. Let's click maybe two more clicks. We can answer the same questions essentially. What might this look like without and with formal data governance? Have you, I know I've dealt with this in the past at the state level. I'm wondering if others have dealt with this and how you might have.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious for an actual example of this, because I could imagine possibly being able to say that's my child, just because you're the only Native Hawaiian family in some small county with a child in the program, even though other people in the community wouldn't know that. Has someone had it where they could identify information on other children through disaggregated data? Because that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, and it would probably take a very data savvy parent who's testing the system, but they are out there. And it might not be a parent. There are other people who might be trying to understand what policies and procedures the state has in place to make sure that there are some protections. It would probably take, in order to identify another child, it would probably take some knowledge about another family that you know personally that maybe others don't know about. But I think it's possible that you could make certain assumptions based on your knowledge of another family. I appreciate Susan is saying in Alaska that they have to be very careful with this. And Bruce is chiming in. Small ends must be a routine. Certainly, I think this is one of the more, the small n issue is probably one of the more common issues that states are used to working with. Do other participants here have any experience with this? Maybe not this specific scenario, but ways that you were able to help protect this kind of information? Are there specific strategies that you've implemented or policies that you've documented to help this situation? I know at one point I was involved with a state team that was working on documenting exactly what that threshold was to prevent and mitigate disclosure of PII. It does look a little bit different in every state, and some states have different thresholds even depending on which community or population is involved. So there's some tailoring depending on the scenario and the populations. That's one way to go about this. And also it's certainly important with any data governance decision, but this one in particular, to make sure that you're getting some really good representative input from your stakeholders about what is an appropriate threshold to help avoid this situation.
Nicholas, somewhere back in my memory, there is a document that is a summary of the different departments of education, assessment divisions that have to establish those N sizes based on their own criteria. Like you said, every state is different.
Right.
And I know that document, I've come across it and I pulled information from it. I'm guessing it's at least probably 8 years old now, but it gave some really nice examples of different ways of handling small N's.
Wonderful. I wonder if we could unearth that and shed some light
I'm
on
going to
it.
put it on my list to try to find.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I've seen it as low as about 10 and as high as 20. It really does vary depending on the context. All right. Well, hopefully this gives you a sense of what data governance, formal data governance, could do for you in some of these real world scenarios. On the next slide, what we'd like to do is we're going to share a link to a little notepad and a website called Padlet. And we'd like you to just, broadly speaking, you don't have to go into too much detail, but we are curious to know, help inform our TA in particular, but just have a sense of what data governance issues you've had either in the past or present. What have you been dealing with? What issues are top of mind for you? And we've got the link there in the chat box. So take a moment, go ahead and open that, and take a few minutes to just reflect and share on the Padlet. You can share anonymously about what issues you have been dealing with. And Bruce, I'm wondering, do we want to pull up the screen and kind of reflect and some responses trickle in?
Yeah, I think we should. We're also going to have to watch the time.
Yep. Yeah, getting people to follow the rules when emailing documents with PII. I speak from personal experience to say that is probably one of the most common issues, and it still happens today. And unfortunately, it's sort of a reality that we have to help mitigate. So I can totally relate to that response. Failure of everyone, including supervisors, to follow their data governance policies. Yeah, it's one thing to have it in writing. It's another thing to have those involved, especially those who can set an example, to actually implement those practices and policies. Yeah, providing meaningful and actionable data to decision makers who just do not understand FERPA limitations. Yeah, I think there's an ever-present tension, I think, especially perhaps with data consumers. Maybe it's the media or policymakers themselves who don't understand some of the rather strict limitations that we have to follow. Great. One other example that just came to mind for me in the past, I know there was some debate in our state team about setting data retention policies and where to draw the line when you want to run longitudinal analyses, especially multiple cohorts. If you're looking longitudinally, you've got to consider what that cutoff point would be and when you're effectively not able to perform those kinds of studies. Got a few more trickling in, I appreciate that. Working within our agency's data governance process committee, trying to understand the operations, especially probably when it's a newer team getting underway, absolutely. Appreciate your thoughts. I think just to stay on track with our schedule, we'll switch back to the slideshow. And Bruce, I think you're going to take it from here for a little bit to...
I will. Chris, if you'd pull up the first of our 2 polls. And if we would have people respond to this little question before we share with you the resource that you may be able to employ in your data governance. Now, this is just for state attendees, so a couple of you do not qualify. You know who you are. Hi, Cindy. DaSy created packets and templates to support data governance development. Were you aware? Please pick one of the 5 options. And Chris, you're going to have to kind of watch as these come in.
We're at 9 responses right now.
That's it. We'll take it. Show us the results. Hey, that's pretty good. Nobody's addicted to them. Oh, you don't know how hurt that makes me feel. Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. So about half of you are up to speed on this and about half of you not. So that's great. I hope to be able to show you a couple of things. Chris, go ahead and close that and let's go to the data governance toolkit. And there is next slide. Next slide. Well, actually, you can bring us right into the toolkit itself or to the next slide. Yeah, here's where we're going and you can check it out now and later. But if you do go wander off, I'm going to bring you back. I'd like you to wander in this area so you can keep your focus on data governance. And Chris, if you would bring us into that toolkit, please. And you know what kind of lag time I'm dealing with here, so you may already be on it. Ah, I see it. Excellent. So in DaSy 1, there was a group of us who sat for months, well over a year, and hammered out a data governance toolkit for Part C and for 619, knowing full well that those 2 particular early childhood entities don't necessarily control the entirety of their data governance. Still, this resource was something we put together and we think is extremely helpful. Now in DaSy 2, just a year and a half ago, a few of us, much smaller group, spent more time on the 8 topics of data governance that you see here. Not the introduction, not the resources, but the 8 topics there have both considerations and templates. I'm going to show you the data breach response, and if time allows, I'll show you one other. It'll be first come, first serve if anybody wants to see one of the other ones. So what we have done is we have taken each of these 8 data governance topical areas, put a little overview about it, which is you're seeing here, and then we developed a packet, and in just a moment, I'm going to have Chris pull up that packet, which we recommend that you, as a Part C or 619 data manager, the coordinator, director, knowledgeable people, small team would get together and develop a policy around the topic, in this case, data breach. Now I'm going to plug DaSy staff here because I have helped a couple of states on a couple of their policies think through those and develop a policy, a written formal data governance policy on a topical issue. So please ask for some help on this as necessary. Chris, if you would go to that data breach response packet, that Word document for me. Thank you. Each of the 8 topical packets is laid out exactly the same way. The introduction differs, and if time allows, I'm going to show you that. It talks about how to use the packet, You read one overview, you've read them all, put together a little team, and then you go to considerations. I'll have you stop on considerations. As what you'll see here are letters in red, small case on the far left, and those come into play. You'll see template section numbers, and those come into play around each of the considerations. So we ask what I'll call a lot of minutia-based questions. And we want, this is very intricate and it's nuanced and it's state specific. So we couldn't answer everything. But you'll see how your answers to your considerations will feed into the template in just a minute. So as a small team, you would go through and write out write out some draft language that you'll bring into the template a little bit later. You'd ask these questions. When does this policy take effect? How frequently will it be updated? Will this be publicly accessible? If so, where? What parties are required to follow this? And answer those questions. And by so doing, you can then crosswalk these answers. Chris, I'm going to have you scroll down to the template. About the next page, right there. So we've taken what we believe is the overview template for this particular policy on data breach response. If you happen to have that situation, what is the process that you would use to address the data breach? And we put that in here. Now, some things like effective policy date, we couldn't put that in. But the other things, we tried to give some base language that you could work from. So if you scroll down a little bit more, we're going to get to the meat of this. Here's the revision process, how people can access relevant parties. Let's go down to the purpose. We take a stab at the purpose. You would obviously make any edits to that. Definition of what a data breach is. We tried to define that. You would augment that to your own definitions if anything there needed to change. And then we get into the application of this particular data governance policy. What are we considering a data breach? What data systems under ART Part C or our 619 control do we believe are impacted here? What specific data elements? Usually when we're talking about data breach, we're talking about personally identifiable information about children and families, right? So those are the elements that we're trying to capture here. If those go rogue, we would consider that a breach, and then we get into what happens if a breach occurs. Continuing to scroll down, we get into the responsibilities, not necessarily by name, but by role. You might also put the role and the name. Who is responsible for what related to this particular policy, the training on this, making sure everybody understands it. 10.6 is violations of this policy within the agency. So whoever put in that supervisor comment, if a supervisor is failing to abide by the written formal policies on this data governance, that would be a violation and there would be some level of consequence. Maybe minor if it's a supervisor, maybe not. Scroll down to number 11 for me, if you would, Chris. Thank you. Now we get into the procedures if the breach occurs. What are the types of actions that are necessary? Who would take those actions? And obviously, that is going to escalate as the severity, if you will, of the breach happens. You're going to try to find out why and how, what the damage is. Continue down to number 12 for me, Chris, please. Thank you. And then there is almost always we have, how do we support this policy? What are the trainings and the documentation? So this is an example of one of the 8 topical areas requiring you, maybe a DaSy TA provider, to think through the considerations, take those considerations that are specific to your state and program and populate this. Hey, Bruce, we don't have control of our data governance policies. We sit inside the Department of Health and they have, the big formal data governance committee that meets once a month. I understand that. And we've got some other supports, hopefully, that can help those of you in that situation. We understand you may not have control of your data directly relative to this. However, some things you do. If you take a look, and Chris, I'm going to go back or ask you to go back to the Data Governance Toolkit, that front page with the 10 icons, 8 of which are topical, 1 of which is the introduction. Yep, that's it. You may have a lot more control over your data requests, your public reporting, data systems change, use of electronic communications, the reference in the chat around emails and such, using personal devices, even some of your security and access, retention and destruction. So doing a time check here, 10:48. I'm not sure we're going to have enough time, but let me just tell you that those 8 topics are there for you sitting here, and we've got some people who would love to help you with them. Chris, in the issue of time, I'm going to have you move us to the blogs, which is the next slide, 22. All right. And if you would open up, where does your agency's existing data governance live? The top one for me. And I'll also note, even though we may not have time, that in the data governance toolkit that I just spoke about, in the introduction, we get into even more nuance about where your data governance lives and how you can influence those people who may be given the data governance power inside your agency. This blog, like the others, is a simplification of around this topic of finding out your agency's data governance and how to influence your agency's data governance specifically to your CR 619 program. So there's a number of recommendations. I'm not going to go through them all about your existing structure that you're working with, who you need to work with, applying your data governance policies, prioritizing those, etc. Short and sweet, as are all the blogs. A couple of the other blogs, I'll have you go back to that page, Chris, to our slide. You can imagine is data governance a must-have or just more paperwork? Well, no surprise, it's a must-have. Do it before you need it. Develop a written state data systems change policy. That was one of the scenarios that Nicholas brought to our attention. I think it's really important as a Part BC data manager to document those data system changes, have a really strong written policies for that. And then there's a really nice document about data breach of PII, which I suspect Los Angeles Unified School District would wish they had some of that right now. I want to plug, next slide, a document that DaSy developed many years ago called the Data System Framework. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it or at least aware of it. Inside that DaSy Data System Framework are these components, one of which is called Data Governance and Management. In that component or that subcomponent, there are the 3 bulleted areas, okay? And it speaks to what is quality data governance around those 3 areas. It is an exceptionally well-written document, and it comes with a self-assessment tool, so you can assess your data governance in those 3 areas. There's some DaSy staff who could help you with that. It's a really nice use of a tool to help you prioritize where you might want to think about putting your data governance efforts. The DaSy Data System Framework, and specifically the self-assessment tool that is a companion to that framework. Okay, next slide is a poll. 3 questions on here. Chris, if you'd pull that up for the audience, please. This is for state staff also, or only. There are 3 questions. You may have to use the bar on the right to get to all of the options on the 3rd. Do you feel involved in the data governance that oversees your program? Yes, no. How prepared are you to address your state data governance needs? I'm prepared, somewhat, very. And then which, if any, of the data governance components and topics are you interested in receiving more TA? Which could mean you go get it yourself and pull it down and use it. It is available for you at all times for that. Actively requesting TA from a DaSy TA provider on the data governance toolkit components. Chris, tell me when we've got a quorum.
We're at 4, we're at 6, so.
We'll take it. Let's see what the results are. So let's look at these and discuss those. Yeah, that's good. 50-50. Meaningfully involved. That's excellent. Unprepared, somewhat, and very good. And if you can scroll down to the third item for us.
I think everyone will have to scroll themselves in order to
Oh,
be.
sorry.
Mhm.
That's me. I'll scroll myself then.
Yeah, it looks like data requests was the most popular, but several others also in the running. Electronic communications, that really was a theme from earlier on the Padlet.
And public reporting.
Public reporting, top 3.
Well, great. For those of you who picked any and all of these, please go to the Data Governance Toolkit, access the ones that you're most interested in, look them over, and how can we help you? I've helped a couple of states on the data request one. Retention and destruction, I've actually not helped a state on that one. Electronic communications, we've helped. Public reporting, we've helped. Systems changes, data quality, data breach. So good, great. Glad to see there's some interest in those. Right. Okay. Nicholas, I think this is yours.
Sure. Well, so as we approach the end of our time together today, we've already put in a plug several times, but we'll do it once more to please ask for help. DaSy is always available. That's really our job, is to help you get started, even if it's at the very beginning with some of these, or if you're feeling like you've got some momentum, but it would help to have an external facilitator or sounding board. We can really try to customize our role in provision of TA. So please, don't hesitate to contact Bruce or myself or your state liaison if you're interested in pursuing any of these topics any further. Definitely try to chunk this out. Start small, especially if you're getting started. Don't tackle everything at once. I think typically we see the most success when you bite off just small components of a variety of resources, whether it's completing the self-assessment on the DaSy framework. Typically states will focus on one particular area rather than the whole framework, and maybe governance, or even one element within governance might be your focus to start with. And you start to create some momentum, and eventually that will snowball, hopefully into some larger developments. And then, try to pick one high value, high visibility data governance topic as your pilot, as you think about starting small. What's going to give you the greatest return on investment, whether it's an area where you feel like you need the most support, or you have the least policies and procedures in place, or if it's something that's fairly high visibility in your state and you're interested in shoring it up even more, that might be an area to focus on as well. Bruce,
hey, Nicholas. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just thinking back on the states that I've worked with. No, I wasn't thinking about the states. I was thinking about the policies that I worked with on a couple of states.
Mhm.
And it was, hey, Bruce, I want this data request policy, right? We need one, or we need to update ours. And it was basically as easy as send it to me. Okay, I'd read it. All right, let's have a call. It didn't take that long, and we'd play with it. I'd add some stuff, I'd draft, they'd take it, go back to their people, play with it, usually one more time. It was not all that labor intensive, really. Now, we weren't starting from scratch in most cases, but even if you were starting from scratch, the template and considerations that we've got gives you a pretty great place to start from.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's boring. It's not the sexiest thing you're gonna do, but it's not that hard. I think we can jumpstart it. and it's not that labor intensive. We're not looking, it's not an on-site meeting or anything like that. So I don't want it to sound overwhelming because I don't think it is overwhelming. I think we've taken a lot of or we put together a lot of things that will help expedite the development of some good formal data governance policies around the topics that we've done. Obviously, there are other topics out there that we haven't done. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that insight, Bruce. Yeah, definitely those templates help get you over that writer's block, perhaps at the beginning of the process. All right, we've got about 3 minutes left. We wanted to allow a little bit of time for any other questions or answers. If you've got a question that you came to today's session with, or something sparked for you during the session, we'd love to hear more. And if you've got any other ideas for resources or other kinds of TDA that we could support you with, or other states with, we'd love to hear those as well. So what's on your mind at this point? Perhaps it's okay if you need time to process and follow up with us. We'll certainly be available as well at that point.
All right, Nick, I'm going to do this to you. We talked about knock-knock jokes and we thought we had another presenter. I got one. You've got to start it.
All right, here I go. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
I don't know. Who is there?
Well, you have to say your name.
Oh, Nicholas.
Sorry, I need two-factor authentication. I can't accept just that.
Oh, you got me there, Bruce.
It's all corny, but we had another presenter who thought, well, we ought to do a knock-knock joke, and that's what I just came up with.
That was awesome, Bruce.
Thanks, Barbara.
This is the reason that we've invited you to all those weekly team meetings. That was wonderful.
Yep. Data governance doesn't have to be boring all the time.
That's right. There you go.
All right. See y'all at the Part C data managers. Call it a minute.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye,
all
all.
for coming. We appreciate your participation today. Take care.